The roots of video gaming stems from the arcades, starting in 1971 with Computer Space from the founders of Atari, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. They would then follow it up soon after by Pong in 1972. As the years flew by, more and more titles would place their mark in the ever-growing market we find ourselves in today. Titles like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Street Fighter II, and Daytona USA to name a few. As the gaming industry grew, arcades and home consoles became better and better, and as did the games that support them. But only a few arcade titles in the later years will leave a notable ripple in the vast sea of gaming that the genre has become as the initial predecessors did upon their final release. And even fewer would take on what the founders built and step them up to a whole new level. Hello, and welcome to Between the Cushions, a deep dive into games that we have finished here on the Archive Couch with either our Classic Hour gameplay or with our many other couchmates. I am your host for today's segment, Blue Pyro, and we are here to highlight the game, Ikaruga. Ikaruga, originally released in Japanese arcades on December 20th, 2001, is best defined as a bullet hell space shooter. The following year, limited still to Japan, the Sega Dreamcast would get its own port on September 5th, 2002, leaving the gamers of the West only to admire the game from afar. Fortunately though, it was announced on August 15th, 2002, that publishing rights for the Nintendo GameCube would be released in January 2003, under the Atari brand. Exciting news as this would be, the market would still remain exclusive for Japan, as it was released January 16, 2003. Initially, there was no plan to bring the title overseas, but that would soon change after 12 days. It was announced that Infogrames would be releasing the GameCube port to other territories. North America would be getting its hands on this challenging game on April 15th and Europe by May 9th. Ikaruga, being initially released as an arcade title, is not heavy in its story, but does show pieces through its chapter summary sections to the player at the in-between sections of each level. An example of the story spotlights come from when the player first launches the game, as texts take up the center screen reading, "I will not die until I achieve something. Even though the ideal is high, I never give in. Therefore, I never die with regrets." This would be the prologue of the story, as immediately the player is launched through a tunnel with non-hostile enemies swarming the launching bay. Once they escape the opening launch, the player is realigned with the small cutscene that highlights the start of the game with Chapter 1 reading, "Alas, Ikaruga is going. Undesired, unwanted. What makes them go? It is nothing else than the principle of the man who has the reason for being." From there, the player takes through the clouds and fights off waves of enemies emerging from the background, and further beyond until they reach the boss of that level. Each level follows in the similar pattern, getting progressively harder the further the player progresses. However, for those fortunate enough to get the physical release of the game on the GameCube, the manual provided a story synopsis as follows. I apologize ahead of time for any name butchering that may occur. Several years ago, in a small island nation of Horai, on the most powerful men of the nation, Tenro Horai discovered the Obunsunugami Okanakai, the power of the gods. This energy emanated from an object he dug up from deep within the earth and gave him powers of unimaginable strength. Soon after, Tenro and his followers, who called themselves the Divine Ones, began to conquer the other nations one by one. They considered themselves the Chosen People and carried out their conquest in the name of peace. Meanwhile, a freedom federation called Tenaku emerged to challenge the Honorai using fighter planes called Hitakai. They fought with the hope of freeing the world from Honorai's conquest. But all their efforts were in vain. They lost battle after battle and were eventually almost completely wiped out. Miraculously, however, one young man survived. His name was Shinra. Refusing to accept defeat, Shinra set off again for Honrai to wage another battle. He was shot down and crashed in a remote village called Ikaruga, inhabited by a group of aged people who had been sent into exile there by Honrai's conquests. Kazamori, the village leader, and the other inhabitants pulled Shinra from the wreckage of his plane and nursed him back to health. Shinra regained his strength and announced that he was determined to continue the battle against Honrai. The villagers entrusted him with a fighter plane that they built themselves called the Ikaruga. As for the ship, the manual goes on to read, "The fighter plane Ikaruga was designed by the former engineering genius Amanai. With the help of Kazamori and the leader of Shinkai village, it was kept in secret underground hiding place beneath the village and moved to the surface for battle by means of transportation device called the Sword of Akala. It is the first fighter built that integrates the two energy polarities, white and black, and is capable of successfully switching between the two." Unlike most space shooters of the past, this game works in a unique mechanic to allow the player the ability to switch between the polarities of black and white, and absorb the corresponding color from the enemy energy blasts as they come in. Depending the amount of energy Ikaruga has absorbed, it can return back to the enemy forces with a barrage of missiles. Not only that, but they have their own set of forward-facing blasters that fire out the same respective color. This leaves the player's ship open to be destroyed by taking on hits from the opposing color. The enemy targets, however, take double damage if they take an attack from the opposite polarity as well, and basic damage if hit with the same color. So simply put, for the player, white absorbs white, black absorbs black, and use the opposite color to do bigger damage. The nuance of deeper mechanics go further than that, however. For instance, when you kill an enemy with matching colors, they detonate with blasts of energy in the same color across the field. This can help the player in getting more power to absorb for their missile attack, but does put more bullets out on the screen when there is already a plethora of bullets out there. So strategy sometimes could dictate that it be more advised to not attack. This, however, does go against the core arcade point of the game to get to the higher score. Speaking of which, if the player is able to destroy 3 enemies of the same color in a row, they get a multiplier bonus known as a chain. There is a subtle hint to this. When most enemies appear on the screen, they come in sets of 3. And every time a chain occurs, a soft, robotic-like voice sounds off counting the chain total occurring. Once the chain combo breaks, the numbers are reset and the bonus multiplier is removed. Interestingly enough, there is a second player option in this game mode, and it is not just a player duplicate, rather a unique ship on its own. Now, I don't mean this as in having different abilities than the first player, but a different design and its own entry into the manual as follows. The Genkai fighter plane piloted by Kagari. Kagari, once a Horai assassin, assigned to kill Shinra, was ultimately shot down and rescued by Shinra himself. After this twist of fate, Kagari joined Shinra in the fight against Horai. The Genkai was originally a Horai fighter with excellent performance. However, it presented problems in mass production. As a result of only a few experimental models that were made, Kagari liked the design of the Genkai fighter, and once the fighter plane service department decided to scrap this model, she was able to get her hands on one. Then, after moving to the village of Ikaruga, she had Amanai upgrade it to the same specifications as Ikaruga fighter. Though it is just a one simple paragraph entry note for why the second ship option looks different from the first, it is at least extra effort on the developers to round out the story enough to make it unique. Surprisingly enough, the player can pick between the ships at the start. The developer and publisher of this title was Treasure Co. Limited, a Tokyo-based company known for action, platform, and shoot 'em up, and was founded in 1992 by former Konami employees seeking to explore extra game concepts instead of the repeat sequels. As a side note, I do find it honestly hilarious, given the Kojima and Konami that has occurred after this, as well as other bits of Konami's actions of skipping on game releases. Treasure, though, would go on to release their first game in 1993 of Gunstar Heroes, a run-and-gun shooter of the Sega Genesis. This risky title was essentially released alongside with McDonald's licensed game to cover potential loss and profit that Treasure would occur being a newly established studio. Though this licensed game wasn't a genre of gaming the studio would want to be developing, they knew they would have to give the title its much due respect to prove their worth as developers, and that they were a company worthy of the investment. Both games did fairly well upon release, even the McDonald's game being noted as one of the better examples of licensed games during the 16-bit era console. Gunstar Heroes has been a beloved title on the Sega Genesis, getting high marks of praise, even a Game of the Month from Electronic Gaming Monthly. Treasure would go on to make other notable entries in the gaming industry, such as Sin and Punishment, Wario World, Gradius 5, and many others between all main systems of Nintendo, PlayStation, and Sega. Which, on a quick call-out, I find it funny that Treasure would work on Gradius 5, a series owned by Konami, which, mentioned before, Treasure was founded from leaving Konami, with making sequels. But let's get back to the game itself. Ikaruga's development began during the director Hiroshi Iuchi's off hours, while the team was in mid-development of Sin and Punishment for the N64. What began as a sequel for their Radiant Silvergun series would grow with a small staff of 5 Treasure employees and 3 support staff from G-Rev, a small Japanese studio dedicated towards arcade shooters. Interestingly enough, during prototype stages of development, the Ikaruga ship would helm a limited supply of ammo that could only be refilled upon absorbing enemy gunfire. This would be dropped as it felt to break up the action of the game and would eventually go to the status we have now. This prototype ship, however, would be added into home ports of the game as an additional mode. When it came to the initial release of the game, Ikaruga didn't fly with its opening audience as one may believe. In Japan, though players loved the visuals and the music, the gameplay is where they divided heavily. Veterans of the genre were looking for something more thrilling and fast-paced, something of the more standard space shooter offering. But Ikaruga was a brand new type of shooter, and bringing that variety was important to the growth of the game's centers. The more puzzle-like approach that Ikaruga had brought to the genre could as well been a contributing factor, as players were more accustomed to the tight twitch bullet dodging gameplay of its predecessors. Despite this mixed view, in February 2002, Game Machine listed the game as being the 5th most popular arcade game in Japan. Not only this, but the game had received high marks in reviews for both Dreamcast and GameCube ports respectively. However, this isn't all I want to say about this game. There's a bit of extra change from between the cushions I would like to add in to this piece as well. Though Ikaruga is a title I doubt I will ever be able to beat without having unlimited lives, I can assure you that I will be trying again and again. It is a title that I remember watching highlights from its early years, when getting games from overseas was a rarity and hope and a prayer that would be playable. Region locking was heavy in the early days, where unless you had the proper system to read the proper games, it wasn't going to work. Which is a process I never could understand. Why make a product split like this? I understand with Nintendo Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System days, the North American version was made to be more like a VCR and step away from the video game crash that the Atari created. As well, I am far more understanding to the idea that certain games don't exactly appeal to audiences over here. These are different types of demographics, different tastes. That would be a limit to the game, but when the hardware limits things that much further, I'm at a loss as to why. Why create different hardware for different regions? Look at the N64 cartridge, for instance. They had just little notch differences in the cartridge unit itself. But back to the game. When watching early feeds of the game, I had to not only hope that the game would make it over to the States, but it as well would have to be properly ported so I could actually play it. I never got the Dreamcast till well after its life cycle, and for the GameCube port, I never found out about it until well after it was off the shelves, so I moved on to other titles. But once the 360 got its own port, I was all over that game. Ikaruga has such tight, precise movements that you can thread needles between enemies with such pinpoint accuracy, it's amazing. The hitbox for that ship, I'm sure, is smaller than the ship itself, if not perfectly cut along the ship's lines. I mean, I've narrowly dodged so close I couldn't believe that I wasn't destroyed then and there. The energy absorption of this game was such a nice touch, especially with the management of the revenge bullets and waves of attacks that one has to move between just to survive, even if they were the death of me for numerous times over. And then the music as well fits like a glove onto the gameplay, as you feel like you're taking an epic journey of your own, soaring through the skies, taking on the world's ending threats. But all praises aside, I always had problems with the windowed layout this game had. Whereas the top-down shooters, I get narrow viewpoints and whatnot, but unless I'm sitting right next to the monitors, I can barely see anything. The window settings for this game as well, walls for your score and whatnot, yes, it helps the aesthetic and makes it cleaner, but as well it feels too tight and makes the couch casual part of it not really work. Upon writing this, I will admit I never tried vertical versus horizontal settings for two reasons. First, being a top-down versus side-scrolling shooters of the past, when I think top-down, I think Galaga. Side-scrolling, I think titles like Defender or Lightning Force. All good games in their own regard, but I always feel I do better top-down versus side views. So I was always afraid to change the feed to that, my game experience would fall that much more. Basically, it was ignorance of what actually would occur when implemented because of other games in the same genre. Secondly though, once I get adapted to something, it is very hard to change the orientation where my mind and hands go to react when I'm becoming accustomed. So I didn't want to start from scratch all over again, getting the small skill I already had from hours of trying. Puzzle and arcade style pick up and play type of games have always been my favorite, as they are always a test of how well you can act on the fly, as well as you don't need to have that dedicated hours into the story or whatever to pick up where you last left off. Just grab the controller and have some fun, seeing how far you get. But not every game experience needs to be a dedication to play and become absorbed into its world. Just a momentary step away to enjoy. Though I might spend the same amount of hours into these type of pick up and plays as I do my dedicated games, at least with these, I don't have to outright set into, oh, I need to go over here to complete this side task, or remember what I did last time to pick back up into it. Even with that said, I want to make a comparison of a game like Super Punch-Out to Ikaruga. Though they seem like two different genres, you gotta hear me out. In Super Punch-Out, and honestly even the Wii title of Punch-Out, you are maneuvering and attacking against repeat style pattern attacks. Once you learn the tells of the patterns and what is to come next, you can easily advance into the next stage. Ikaruga is fundamentally the same thing. Enemies appear in the same patterns every time, and those that attack in the same manner each time, such as the opening prologue I mentioned earlier. Enemies are spawning to the right, then to the left, then right, then left. Watch the level's progress time and time again, and you will learn the patterns, and the tells if you will. Even the boss patterns have the same pattern-like mechanics. That being said, give me Punch-Out any day, because by God, the tells in there are so much easier to see. Because what exactly the pattern is here, I am supposed to work through, is beyond me. But I find it amazing that this title alone has had as many ports as it has over the years, and become such an iconic game in its time. It is recognized in Slat magazine
in the top 100 best video games of all time, placed at 92nd. It has certainly added to the genre of space shooters and gave them a good, vital resurgence in popularity when it did. And for anyone who loves these type of games, I cannot recommend this enough for people to pick up and play. Ikaruga has been re-released on numerous occasions over the years, with their most easily accessible being on the Steam library, as well as the PS4 and Nintendo Switch as of 2019. Despite my research, I was unable to find a definitive number of copies sold for the game in total, but only a small note of units from the Dreamcast and the GameCube at roughly 34,000, and Xbox Live Arcade at roughly 137,000, with the Steam sales at 128,000, the last of which is cataloged from 2018. However, not all great titles will reach a million copy milestone. It just seems weird with all the ports of this game, and it had not crossed that line. That being said, Treasure Studio has passed its 30th anniversary back in June 2022, with an announcement that they will be working on a highly requested game. Their staff is what most would be considered a skeleton crew, as they had less than 10 employees in that year. As of the time of writing, the game is still yet to be announced, and the last title this team has released was back in 2014 of a Japan-only release on the Nintendo 3DS, Geist Crusher God, a sequel to the previous year's release of Geist Crusher. While Ikaruga is one of the most notable titles, I have my doubts of a follow-up title being this, but potentially a return to Sin and Punishment series, if not Gunstar Heroes. The former getting the sequel in 2009, as the latter being 2005. And both original titles did get recent re-releases on the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass. But the one I want to place my bets on is honestly Wario World. Reason being, of the Nintendo re-releasing the Switch successor soon, and the outcry that fans want to return a form of that franchise. Only time will tell though, and I look forward to seeing what Treasure will return to the forefront of popularity, as this team certainly shines brightly in its passion they have for games that they develop. I want to thank you all for watching. ArchiveCouch is primarily a Let's Play channel, as we play through older games spanning from the NES all the way up to the PS4. So please come join me and my friends on the couch as we post new videos rotating weekdays scheduled at noon. If you'd like to see us in our early days of the channel, you can watch our playthrough of this game right here. We have certainly grown from these days, but if you want to see how we started, please enjoy our early day footage. As well, we have made a recent return to this game with this week in our lineup in case you would like to see a more modern take on how our channel runs. Between the Cushions, we'll be covering games that we have completed previously on the channel. If there is a game we have finished you would like us to do a retrospect on, please leave a comment down below on what game you would like us to cover next. Or keep an eye out for our recent community poll that lets our couch potatoes speak on which game they would like to see next. That being said, please note it does take a lot of editing and processing for these videos, but when we can complete them, they will be uploaded on Sunday's time slot. I hope to catch you all in the next one. See ya!